A court in southeastern Ukraine has issued a life sentence verdict in a high-profile war crime case. In the city of Zaporizhzhia, a 8-year-old Russian soldier, Dmitry Kurashov, was convicted of murdering a Ukrainian serviceman who had surrendered. The defendant received the maximum custodial term permissible under Ukrainian law, life in prison, marking the first such ruling by Ukrainian authorities for the execution of a prisoner of war POW. According to the indictment and court statements, the crime occurred in January 2024 on the Zaporizhzhia front. Ukrainian prosecutors said Kurashov and Russian troops of the 127th Motorized Rifle Division overran a dugout position near the settlement of Pryutne in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The Ukrainian defender, identified as Vitaly Hodniuk, surrendered after his position was captured. Kurashov then shot him dead in a violation of the laws and customs of war, prosecutors argue. The verdict was rendered by a court in Zaporizhzhia city on the 6th of November 2025. The prosecution framed the case as emblematic of Ukraine's ongoing efforts to hold individuals accountable for war crimes committed during the full-scale invasion by Russian Federation. This is the first verdict in Ukraine's history where an occupier has received such a sentence specifically for the execution of a defense forces soldier, said the Ukrainian investigative body Security Service of Ukraine. In the courtroom proceedings, Kurashov was reported to have originally pleaded guilty to the killing. However, in media remarks after the trial, he later asserted his innocence and sought inclusion in a prisoner exchange arrangement. The contradiction underscores the complex and high-stakes nature of wartime prosecutions. Under Ukrainian criminal legislation, the killing of a prisoner of war constitutes a grave violation of the laws and customs of war. In handing down life imprisonment, the judges emphasized that the victim had been hors combat, no longer in active combat, having surrendered and thus was legally protected under international humanitarian law. The court record cited evidence that the defender laid down arms before the act. The case is particularly significant for several reasons. First, while Ukraine has prosecuted other war crime cases of Russian servicemen, this is the first time that a member of the invading force has been given a life sentence for the execution of a POW. Second, the verdict contributes to Ukraine's broader strategy of documenting, prosecuting and deterring war crimes arising from the invasion. Legal analysts say it may establish a precedent for future proceedings. Third, the sentence sends a signal both domestically and internationally that wartime misconduct, including the killing of surrendered combatants, will face the utmost penalty under national law. At the same time, challenges and questions remain. Gathering reliable evidence in active war zones is difficult, and ensuring due process amid ongoing conflict raises concerns about fairness, transparency and international standards. Analysts caution that while the verdict is symbolically strong, its deterrent effect depends on the sustained pursuit of further cases, including command-level figures and systematic practices rather than isolated incidents. Diplomatically, the ruling bolsters Ukraine's narrative of seeking accountability. It may influence how international courts, tribunals and domestic legal systems view war crimes committed in Ukraine. It also places additional pressure on Russia, which has repeatedly denied any systemic war crimes by its forces. The verdict therefore becomes another marker in the legal and moral dimension of the conflict. Operationally, the outcome could have implications for prisoner exchange negotiations, the treatment of captives on both sides, and the conduct of front-line units. If Ukrainian authorities continue to rely on criminal prosecution rather than solely on military or diplomatic measures, this may shift part of the conflict's dynamic into judicial arenas. In national media, Ukrainian officials emphasize the sentence as proof of enforcement. The SBU said the verdict shows the occupiers that their misconduct may result in the maximum penalty available under Ukrainian law. The Prosecutor General's office noted that investigations are underway into hundreds of alleged cases of unlawful killings, abuse and execution of Ukrainian defenders in captivity. The Russian side has yet to issue a detailed official comment on this specific case. Russian state-linked media and official channels have typically responded to war crimes allegations with denials, or by calling them politically motivated. The lack of transparent Russian cooperation in many such cases remains a recurring obstacle. In closing this first part of the account, a Ukrainian court in Zaporizhzhia has handed down a rare life imprisonment sentence to a Russian soldier for the execution of a surrendered Ukrainian soldier. The decision marks a significant legal milestone in the war and places war crime accountability at the center of the broader conflict. Following the verdict, legal observers and human rights advocates turn their attention to the implications of the ruling and how it may fit into the larger framework of wartime justice in Ukraine. The case of Dmitry Kurashov places the spotlight on how Ukraine handles allegations of war crimes, especially those involving members of Russia's armed forces. While this is the first case of its kind resulting in life imprisonment for the execution of a POW, it follows earlier similar prosecutions by Ukraine under its criminal code. For example, in May 2022, a Russian soldier, Vadim Shishimarin, was convicted and initially sentenced to life for killing a civilian in northeastern Ukraine, although his sentence was later reduced on appeal to 15 years. In the present case, the Ukrainian authorities presented evidence including witness testimony, forensic analyses and battlefield documentation to demonstrate that the victim was no longer contesting the combat and thus entitled to POW status and protection under the Geneva Conventions. The prosecution argued that Kurashov contravened these protections by killing the surrendered soldier. The court found that the act violated both Ukraine's domestic criminal code and the laws and customs of war. For Ukraine, the sentencing carries both symbolic and practical weight. Symbolically, it reinforces the notion that war crimes will not remain impunity-free. Practically, it opens the door for further prosecutions. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office has reported hundreds of investigations opened into alleged unlawful killings, executions of POWs, torture, cruel and inhuman treatment, and other violations by Russian forces or Russian-affiliated formations. The ruling in Zaporizhzhia may serve as a legal benchmark. The international community has taken note. The decision underscores Ukraine's willingness to apply its domestic law at the highest levels in wartime circumstances, aligning with international humanitarian law norms and the obligations of states to prosecute war crimes. Some legal analysts say that full-scale enforcement at this level could strengthen Ukraine's position in tracking and transferring cases to international tribunals or cooperating with partners in evidence gathering and extradition. However, the case also highlights the very significant hurdles ahead. Active conflict zones pose enormous challenges for evidence collection, access to frontline areas, preservation of forensic material, security of witnesses, chain of custody for exhibits, and ensuring fair trial standards remain intact under war conditions. Legal experts caution that while the life sentence is a landmark, it must be complemented by many more convictions and systemic accountability to generate real deterrence. From a military operational viewpoint, the verdict may influence behavior on the ground. Russian and Ukrainian frontline units and their command structures are aware of legal and reputational risks associated with war crimes allegations. While such prosecutions may not immediately alter battlefield conduct, their cumulative effect could contribute to evolving rules of engagement, training and discipline for captors and detainees. Looking at the bilateral and international dimension, the verdict may affect prisoner exchange negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. If Ukraine increasingly emphasizes prosecution over simple exchange, Russia may face greater diplomatic and operational constraints in how it handles captured personnel. At the same time, Moscow may respond by tightening its control, altering its communication or press strategy, or using legal and propaganda tools to counter Ukraine's narrative. In the context of the broader war crime environment, this case arrives amid mounting evidence and reports of executions of Ukrainian soldiers in Russian captivity and other serious violations. For example, a UN human rights mission documented a sharp increase in executions of Ukrainian POWs by Russian forces, saying that nearly 80 such killings were reported across dozens of incidents in recent months. While the Kurashov-Hodniak case deals with a single individual, its significance scales given this wider backdrop. The verdict also raises questions about chain of command liability. While Kurashov was directly responsible for the shooting, investigators and human rights monitors suggest that many similar incidents may involve multiple actors, orders from superiors, or organizational policies of ill treatment. Whether future cases will target higher-ranking officers or command responsibility remains a key test for Ukraine's prosecutorial strategy. Domestically in Ukraine, the ruling has been framed as offering some measure of justice to the families of the fallen and to the broader society. The Ukrainian government emphasized that life sentence verdicts demonstrate that the rule of law remains operative, notwithstanding the ongoing conflict. At the same time, critics caution that the pace of prosecutions remains slow relative to the scale of alleged violations and that some trials may languish or lack transparency. In the Russian public and media space, official commentary has been limited in this specific case. Russia's broader position has been to deny systemic war crimes by its forces and to characterize Ukrainian prosecutions as politically motivated. Whether the Russian government will respond with diplomatic or legal measures tied to this verdict remains unclear. The lack of cooperation from Russian authorities in sharing evidence or permitting access to investigative teams remains a persistent challenge. Looking ahead, the verdict may influence Ukraine's war crime strategy in several ways. Ukraine is likely to continue pursuing domestic criminal litigation of war crimes under its Code of Criminal Procedure, including for unlawful killings, torture, abuse of POWs, and other serious violations. The case may encourage Ukrainian prosecutors to increase efforts at collecting battlefield evidence, witness testimony, forensic documentation, and video materials, including with international assistance. The precedent of a life sentence for a POW execution may encourage similar charges where evidence allows. It may strengthen Ukraine's hand in international cooperation on war crimes, including mapping cases for escalation to international courts or tribunals and improving coordination with foreign jurisdictions. It may also feed into training and reformed policies for detention operations, captive handling procedures, and compliance with international humanitarian law among Ukrainian forces, in part to preserve moral high ground and ensure reciprocal treatment of detainees. In conclusion, a court in Zaporizhzhia has imposed a life injection prison sentence on a Russian soldier for the killing of a surrendered Ukrainian defender, marking the first such verdict in Ukraine's war crimes prosecutions of the current conflict. The decision carries legal, symbolic, and operational implications for Ukraine, Russia, and the broader international legal regime governing armed conflict. The real test now will be whether future rulings build on this precedent, broaden accountability to higher levels of command, and help deter further violations.